Hi everyone, this is the third video of the development unit. In this section, I will talk about parenting styles and how parenting can impact children and their emotional and social well-being, as well as moral development theories. So some important people to know from this section are Diana Baumrind, Lawrence Kohlberg, and Carol Gilligan. We'll start with Diana Baumrind. Diana Baumrind was a clinical and developmental psychologist, and her focus was on parenting styles. She came up with three primary parenting styles. The fourth one is a parenting style where a parent is just not even involved. So the three parenting styles where parents are involved are permissive, authoritative, and authoritarian. And they can be classified based on how responsive the parent is, and then also the type of expectations and how much of expectations the parents have. So an authoritarian parent, we'll start with this parenting style down here. An authoritarian parent is a parent that is going to have rules and expectations. They will expect obedience. They usually are going to be very rigid with their expectations and not very flexible. They're not going to be very emotionally responsive. Diana Baumrind called this parenting style rigid and harsh and very demanding. A permissive parent would be a parent who would fall under this category here. This would be a parenting style where they are highly responsive. So they are very responsive, where an authoritarian parent is not very responsive. So a permissive parent is going to be very emotionally responsive. They're going to tend to their child's desires, but they are going to be very low in demandingness as far as expectation goes. What she would say with this parent is that they're probably not going to be very consistent in enforcing rules. She would say that, but they are just very responsive to their child's needs. She would say that this parent would be too soft. The final parenting style that Diana Baumrind outlined was authoritative, and I will tell you, most of the time students misunderstand or maybe confuse authoritative and authoritarian just because they have a similar first sound. So I'll help you kind of tell the difference. If you notice authoritarian at the end, to me that sounds very militaristic, authoritarian, and that is the parenting style that's very rigid with rules and not very flexible and also not very emotionally responsive. Authoritative has a different ending style. An authoritative parent, they are going to be what Diana Baumrind would say is just right. They are going to be emotionally responsive, but with a balance. They'll also have expectations, but will also be flexible when the situation allows for it. So they're firm but not rigid. They're willing to make exceptions if it's necessary or if the situation warrants it. They're responsive, but they're not overindulgent. And so Diana Baumrind, she was really clear in this type of parenting style is a really good parenting style as far as what will create a well-adjusted child and teenager and adult. So this is what we see from children who have parents of these different parenting styles. So Diana Baumrind says that after following children of these different parenting styles, children of authoritative parents tend to have higher self-esteem. They're more well-regulated as far as their emotions. They're more confident, and oftentimes they tend to be higher achieving students and adults. Children of permissive parents, they tend to have high self-esteem but are a little less responsible. They also have more difficulty regulating their emotions, and they might not desire to be high achieving. Children of authoritarian parents tend to have lower self-esteem, they're less trusting, and oftentimes have poor social skills. So Diana Baumrind would say that how parents nurture their children impacts how their children adjust into adulthood, and it affects them later on in life. So next on our list is Lawrence Kohlberg. So Lawrence Kohlberg followed development of morality. And so Lawrence Kohlberg believed that the way we think about right and wrong changes over time. And he said there are three changes that occur, or three major levels of how we understand right and wrong. So the first stage under Lawrence Kohlberg's idea of morality would be what's happening in childhood. And most of the time in early childhood, children are thinking about right and wrong as far as, what do I get out of it? How does it benefit or hurt me? And so when I'm thinking about right and wrong, I make a decision based on what will most benefit myself, whether that is to avoid punishments or to reap some kind of reward or benefit. Lawrence Kohlberg says the way that we think about right and wrong changes after childhood, and as they're moving into older childhood, teenage years, and it starts to move into thinking about others in a sense, kind of thinking about the world, but more in a sense of upholding the rules, so, or the standards that are set, like keeping order, following the rules, what are the expectations, and right and wrong is determined by those rules. Now, there is a higher step that he would say when thinking about morality. This comes later in adulthood. When thinking about right and wrong, it surpasses the law. And so his final stage he called post-conventional morality, and this is a stage that happens into adulthood, and some adults don't even move into this stage. It just depends, but this would be the highest stage of moral development. And he would say that someone who's thinking about right and wrong, if they believe right and wrong is something higher than laws, that laws could be unjust, that there is a higher sense of justice, there is this assumed human rights that surpasses that there's these higher ethical principles. Typically, if someone is reasoning through right and wrong in that way, he says they've achieved this last and final stage of moral development that typically happens into adulthood, in which you could even critique laws, that laws are not the epitome of right and wrong. So the way that Lawrence Kohlberg determines when someone moves into a different stage, or at what stage they're operating in, he does this by asking questions about moral dilemmas. So he would pose a moral dilemma for the child or the teenager or the adult, and then he would ask them questions about how would they respond, and then he would place them into these levels based on how they interpret what was right and what was wrong, and what they should and should not do in that dilemma. So an example of one of his dilemmas that he would pose is the Heinz Dilemma. And I will read you the Heinz Dilemma. This is a story that he would have read to one of the people that he was speaking with, and then he would ask them questions about what would you do. So this is how the Heinz Dilemma goes. In Europe, a woman was near death from a special kind of cancer. There was only one drug that doctors thought might save her, and it was a form of radium that a druggist in the same town had recently discovered. The drug was expensive to make, but the druggist was charging 10 times what the drug cost him to make. He paid $400 for the radium and charged $4,000 for a small dose of that drug. The sick woman's husband, Heinz, went to everyone he knew to borrow the money. He tried even legal matters, but he could only get enough to gather about $2,000, which was half what it cost. He told the druggist that his wife was dying. He asked him to sell it to him cheaper or let him pay him later, but the druggist said, "No, I discovered the drug and I'm going to make money from it." So, having tried every legal means necessary, Heinz got desperate, and he began considering breaking into the man's store and stealing the drug for his wife. So that's the Heinz Dilemma. So Lawrence Kohlberg would then ask, what should Heinz do? What is the right thing for Heinz to do? And he would have a series of questions that would get the person to talk about what was right and what was wrong. And depending on their answer, if it was focused on the self or avoiding punishments or rewards for the self, he might put that person into a pre-conventional morality level. If they answered questions about following the law, maintaining social order, he would put them into the conventional category, and if the person reasoned with thoughts of, valuing human life over law, if what was right was something that, maybe the druggist was doing something unethical, and reasoning through with those thoughts, he would place them into the post-conventional level. And he said that people were marked by age, and that typically the older someone was, the higher the category they moved into, and they would reason with those higher levels of moral thinking. So then we have Carol Gilligan. Carol Gilligan was an American psychologist, or is an American psychologist, and she focuses on ethics and feminism. She actually worked alongside Lawrence Kohlberg, and they were also thinking about moral development. And so her theories stemmed out of her work with Lawrence Kohlberg. She actually critiqued Lawrence Kohlberg in feeling that his moral stages didn't accurately represent the moral development of women. She said that the way that he created these was based on a sample of boys, and that when he tested this on girls, they didn't tend to answer the same way boys would, and often found them scoring in lower moral levels. And she did not believe that women were less morally developed than men, but she felt like he possibly created the criteria in a way that didn't necessarily match the way women thought about right and wrong. And so she believed that women were actually placing more value on empathy and relationships in their decision making, and that he didn't take that into account when he was creating his stages. And so she, like Lawrence Kohlberg, created those same stages of pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional, but she focused more on, as they developed, their changing ability to think about other people. And so as they advanced in their moral advancement, their answers would change more into like self-sacrificing and putting others first when they would get higher into those higher levels. So what's most important about Carol Gilligan is that you just understand that she critiqued Lawrence Kohlberg in bringing about an understanding of moral development that she felt like better represented women. And she felt like the way that Lawrence Kohlberg represented moral development was not as balanced. And so that is what she brought to the table about moral development. So this is the end of this video on parenting and its impact on children and how they adjust into adulthood, as well as moral development and the stages of moral development. I hope this was helpful. Definitely reach out if you have questions.